Who's ready for a really cool Platycerium or Staghorn fern? Stick around with me and let me show you, I'm not going to say the name, the people that know. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, today, you know I'm going to have to do it, let me bring up the plant. Say hello to the Superbum! And let me bring it in a bit closer so you can kind of see. It's finally got its fertile fronds, which is nice. I think I was talking with somebody back in Malvern last year, and I was saying that it only had its shield fronds, and it hadn't got its fertile fronds for me yet. So, good news. But the people that have been here for a while have known that I have kind of featured this a lot of the times in kind of my tour videos of my space rather than giving it its highlight. I don't think I have done a review on this plant. If I have, I will link it somewhere at the top of the screen. But yes, without further ado, let's dive into it. Okay, now the background on this plant is, and I'm trying to remember how I got this. So the video title will have this. I do have a sneaky suspicion that I got this plant probably about, I want to say a minimum of 5 years now. So this has been growing for a while. I'll see if I can find some pictures from my plant care app, which would have been when I first got this, and add it here. It was a very, very small plant. I found it in a local garden centre. The people that know, they've got a really good garden centre near me here that does bring in some really interesting and unusual plants, usually for not an awful lot of money. And it was doing that even before the pandemic was happening. It only got better, obviously, after the pandemic because houseplant boom. But it was one that I got, and it was very small. It was firstly, it was in a pot. It wasn't mounted, and I'll get onto the mount a bit later on in accessories and care, because this is the jankiest of jankiest mounts at the moment, and I do need to like give this some proper love at some point. I just haven't done it yet. But feral plant, for anybody who's going to be questioning, this is one of the feral plants, 100%, because I mean, okay, so the brown bits I'll talk about in just a bit. This is the infertile frond, and this is the fertile frond. So this is also sometimes called the shield frond, and it kind of makes sense because it kind of shields the root mass at the bottom there. But yeah, got this in a bit of a pot. Obviously, almost immediately repotted it into a bit of a mount situation, which I had done on a piece of cork tile. And it has been growing for me ever since, basically. It's come across different houses. I've had this growing in regular household humidity. I've had this growing in here, obviously. And overall, I didn't know an awful lot about staghorn ferns. This is the first plant I ever mounted. So I should tell you something, and this was a good few years back. I don't think I actually mounted a lot of plants after this one. Not because I found the process difficult, it's just because it just didn't factor into like my thought process. And I kind of let it do its own thing. The thing that I was very grateful for in terms of some of the background when I got this is that I had somebody on my channel a while back, and I think they were based in Australia, and they were getting some of these just growing naturally on trees there. And they were telling me a bit more about its care, and I'll touch on that in just a second. And I'm so glad that I heard that advice. But overall, this is, and I know this is a plant that not a lot of people can get very easily, so I was very fortunate to find it. I don't think I wrote down the price of this, but if I am not mistaken, I think this was somewhere close to, and I got it on discount as well. This was from the bargain box. So this was a lot of the like reduced to clear, and it wasn't looking that great. Ignore the brown bits. I will explain the brown bits. They are still on there on purpose with this plant. But yeah, I kind of got it, and I think it was originally like 20 or 30 Great British pounds, and I probably only got this for 5 or 10, granted a lot smaller. But yeah, that was kind of the background of how this plant came into my care. Now, speed of growth with this one is a bit of an interesting topic because this is, and I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to sugarcoat this is not a particularly fast growing plant. I have got a different Staghorn fern, which I'll put the name by something, I'll put the name at the top there. And this was the Staghorn fern that most people can get quite easily, at least here in the UK and the EU, unlike this one, where it has multiple kind of fronds coming off the back of it, unlike this one, basically. That one does grow a lot faster. I mounted it in Malvern this year when I was there doing my talk, and for the people that haven't seen that video, I will add it at the top there. But it was one that, unlike that one, which will grow fast, this one does grow a bit slower. So let me benchmark this. So if, and I'm trying to hold it because it's kind of like a weird angle, it's kind of sitting on the wall most of the time, so it's kind of growing very much like this. But I'm trying to give you a bit of a better view of what the plant looks like. This is one that if I'm benchmarking this against the golden pothos in my space in here, which is where this is growing as well, I would say this, if a golden pothos in the growing season will grow 2 to 3 new leaves on each stem, this one, it's difficult to kind of judge it with this one because it grows in a very different way. I can't just say it's got a new leaf because like this fertile frond took a long time to get here. Let me show you something else and hopefully that will focus. Can you see that there? That is the newest infertile frond. So the shield frond that you're seeing here that is coming in. So that will usually start like that. It's very, very fuzzy and it can take 3 to 4 months to fully cover the plant. And granted, it was, as with most plants, it was a lot faster than it is now. It still was never fast. It was a lot faster than what it is now when I first got it, and it was younger. The bigger it's getting, the more kind of impressive that kind of infertile frond or the shield frond is becoming, the longer it takes. It kind of makes sense. But, so it's difficult to benchmark this and kind of say, so you'll get a new shield frond. As I said, this took a good few years to even start. This only started, this one's actually grown relatively well. This kind of fertile frond started growing, and I couldn't even tell it was this that was growing, but when it was first starting, because it was so small, this started growing probably at the beginning of the summer, so probably around June time, and we're now the beginning of October. So that should tell you something. And it's got to this stage. I mean, it's quite sizable, but it does take its time. So bear that in mind. This isn't going to be a plant that's instant gratification, but it does get quite impressive. So there is that to remember. Now, ease of propagation with this one. This is not an easy plant to propagate even slightly, basically. There is a lot of steps that you need to kind of go through. I'm not going to go through how you propagate a fern in this because that almost needs its own video. I also have never done it, so I can only talk to you about what I have found through my research. Anybody who has actually propagated a fern through spores, not divisions, because this is from what I could see, this is a specific staghorn fern or a platycerium that you cannot kind of propagate through divisions. The other one that I was talking about, and again, I'll put the name at the top there, I think you can propagate via divisions. This is one that you can only fertilize, you can only propagate through fertile fronds. And what will happen with these fertile fronds, and mine have not started doing it yet, they're not mature enough. I'll show you that back of those fertile fronds. They will at some point get something that looks like brown dots and they'll start getting powdery. At that point, it has created spores. And as far as I understand it, that is all you need in order to propagate this. But again, the process is going to be more similar to if you're growing something from seed. Even though it's not a seed, it's a spore, it's more leaning towards that than the traditional kind of house plants that we would get and either divide them or take cuttings from and then root them out. So as far as I understand the process is you get the spores, and it needs to be those kind of brown dotty bits that will be powdery and dry because it will get to that stage. and you will then put it into some form of inert media, like maybe something like a damp sphagnum moss. It will need its own container with a lid. It will still need some light, not an awful lot of light as far as I understand, but it needs to keep that humidity, and it needs as high level of humidity as possible, because those spores, and I think the gametogens, I think, or something, I'll put the correct name, that will start forming, and it kind of almost looks like moss or kind of like a green slime to begin with. And then eventually you will start getting something that looks more like kind of leaflets that are going to occur. From what I understand, this entire process could take weeks, months, up to a year or more in order for you to go from something like a spore on this plant to something that is a plantlet that is probably just about big enough to get mounted. So this is a long process, but this is how these plants would propagate. So not the easiest of things, but again, I've only told you what I've learned through my own research. I have not physically done this yet. I know there are a lot of adventurous people that watch this channel that might have potentially done something like propagating staghorn ferns from spores, or any form of ferns from spores. If you want to discuss how you found that experience, do let us all know down below. I, for one, would be very interested to know. Now, coming into availability on this one, and this is what I was kind of hinting at in the very beginning of the video. This isn't a staghorn fern, although it has become a bit more readily available. This is obviously not going to be the most readily available staghorn fern that you're going to find, but it has become more readily available in the past few years. And by that, I mean, before, when I first got this 5 years ago, I might have seen this plant, even though I got it from the bargain bin, I may have seen this plant at least, and I can benchmark it against the plant store or the garden center that I was getting it from. I might have seen it once a year, once every 2 years. I am now seeing this crop up once every few months. So it's becoming a bit more, not necessarily readily available, but it's becoming more available, at least where I am. And this is just, it's a very specific sample of one place, because it's not something that I look for all the time online either. So, and I do know from when I was talking to people at Malvern, both this year and the previous year, this isn't one that you find very easily, but it is one that a lot of people do look for. And I'm glad that the Platyceriums or the staghorn ferns are getting a bit of a spotlight, because there are, as far as I'm aware, not just the Superbum or the Bipinnatifidum, I think, I might be wrong, I'll put the name again. Those are not the only ones that you can get. I think there's also kind of more dwarf varieties and things like that. So it's nice that people are discovering them, because it's a good plant to start introducing more into household conditions, and I'll kind of expand a bit more, I think, on that in my kind of final thoughts, and a bit more on the accessories and care. But availability wise, as I said, pricing, I got it for quite cheap. I told you in the beginning how much I got it. It was like 5 to 10 Great British pounds. On discount, it would have been, I think, it would have been 20 or 30 pounds originally. And I think even that was a good price for this, considering how difficult it was to find this at some point. I think the reality is now, if you find this in a store now, it's probably again going to be about 20 odd British pounds, I guess, 20 to 30 from what I've kind of seen online as well of it, because it doesn't come up as often, but it hasn't got higher, if that makes sense. So do with that what you will. Do I think this is going to drop drastically in price? Not specifically for this Platycerium, because look at what I said during the propagation section of this video, which is it takes a very long time, because you can only propagate this via spores. The other one, the whatever, I can't remember the name. This is my Superbum. I remember Superbum because Superbum. But I don't remember the other one ever. That one, if it is propagatable by division, it makes sense that you get them more readily. They tend to be cheaper, and you get them in mass as well, because it's a lot easier for the growers to get them to a stage where you can buy them. This takes a lot more time and work, I would imagine. So there is that to be said about the availability of this plant. Now, this is a fun section because not very often I can say this. Not a singular pest have I ever experienced on my Platycerium. Not a single one. Maybe once I took a slug out of it from the inside of the kind of crown or the kind of shield fronds, but that was pretty much it in terms of pests, and it didn't really do much damage to the plant. It didn't chew on anything. I have never had, I'm kind of looking at it now, no, I have never had mealybugs, thrips, whitefly, spider mites, nothing. There is a kind of a bit of a cast. You might be able to see that there's a slight fuzziness that's happening on some of these leaves, and maybe if I bring it in and show you the bit that I've managed to accidentally bump. Can you see a slightly darker section there that doesn't have that fuzz? And then you can see the fuzz that is happening next to it as well. So that is something to be said. That fuzz around the leaf can really easily be wiped off, basically. It's not like you blow on it and it disappears, but if you rub something against it, it's more than likely going to take it off. Does it harm the plant? Not necessarily. Is it good to try to avoid it? Yes, if you can, because that does give it a certain level of protection from the elements and also from potential pests as well. That kind of fuzziness is not going to be anything that the pests are going to want to go anywhere near. So the more you keep that on the plant, the better the plant will be, especially when it comes to pests, as far as I would imagine with this one. Now, coming into accessories and care. And this is one that is interesting because you could mount it. You could leave it in a pot as well. I don't know a lot of people that have left it in a pot because of the way that this grows. You'd kind of want to display this. This is one that I would almost say that you kind of need to put it on a mount. You put it somewhere in your house. The flip side of that is, and this is where the advice came from the Australian viewer, this actually isn't a very thirsty plant at all, let alone for a fern. A lot of the time, staghorn ferns, and we've discussed this recently on my channel quite a few times, they are not very thirsty plants in general. They do have very kind of hair-like roots, the same as most ferns. So when I took it out, I did not touch the media in the slightest. What I did, and you'll be able to see the jankiness that is happening now. So there is my usual mount. You might be able to see that it's also pulled away from that. And I've been able to kind of jerry-rig it there with some plant ties. There's an awful lot of empty space that you can see in the bottom there. Do I need to sort this out? Yes, but you could see what I meant by that cork tile, which was what was there for this plant. And you might be able to see as well that the fronds are here, but the fertile frond is going that way. It is because in my space, and you need to be clear about where you're going to put it, there are other plants that are growing here, so it's grown away from that in order to bring out that fertile frond. But in terms of its care, because this is on my wall and it kind of gets watered the same way that most of like my orchids would get watered, which is that automatic watering system that I've set up. This gets watered relatively infrequently in the winter, and to be fair, it can probably do with a bit less water, but this is one that doesn't mind going a bit dry. But this is currently getting watered now, and it's because I'm starting to pull back on the watering on my orchids as well. I'm wanting them to dry out a bit more between waterings now that it's winter, it's darker days, it's colder as well. This is getting watered once every 4 to 5 days. And it's very, very small drips of water, so it's never a full flush on this one. If I wanted it to go for a bit longer, I would flush this, I would have to bring it down all the time. So that is something you're going to need to remember. These can get huge. Superbum, that I always keep joking about it, is think of it as superbum, which means, and have a look if you can see any pictures, I'll see if I can find some and put them here, of what the mature specimens of this look like in nature. They are gigantic and they can get absolutely huge. So bear that in mind, wherever you're going to put it, give it space. I mean, I haven't given it much space here. When I'm going to move to the next house, this will be getting a bit more of a spotlight position because I can imagine this is going to get quite large. And actually the conversation I was having with the people in Malvern when we were talking about this was because it was on a display from Grow Tropicals and they had very mature specimens and they looked stunning and they were kind of quite high up as well. So there is that to be said. But in terms of its care, does it get an awful lot of water? No, I told you what water it gets. It is quite high in my conservatory, so it does get relatively bright light because, again, have a look when you can see some of these plants in nature. Sometimes they're not almost entirely under cover, so they can take a bit more light than you would imagine. Do not give this very, very, very low light. It will not appreciate it, I don't think. And then the other thing is, in terms of fertilizer, this gets fertilized because it's with my orchids, and it goes, I put the fertilizer within that solution that feeds the orchids. At this particular moment in time, it's getting fertilized with orchid fertilizer. But, and it's not harmed it. It's not harmed it for over a year now. It's fine. The way that these plants work generally, and this will explain the brown crispy bits that you can see there, is that shield frond, if it's in nature and it's kind of somewhere like that on a tree, it would wait for leaf debris to fall within this area here. It also helps to maintain some of that moisture, but as that leaf debris decomposes, that is what is feeding this plant in nature. So that's something really good to keep in mind. But overall, not a particularly fussy plant. And I think I've done a video where I talk a bit more about my mounting process, and I will link it somewhere at the top of this video. This would work perfectly with this, and the people that came and did the workshop with me at Malvern this year will know we didn't do this specific Platycerium or Staghorn fern, but we did the bi one. Again, I'll put the name, I swear. But not a particularly difficult thing to mount if you wanted, especially if you're starting with it small. If it's a bit bigger, it becomes a bit more challenging on how you're going to get things wrapped around, but not massively difficult plant to kind of mount. Also, something worth noting is I've just put it on that board that I was talking about before with the soil that it had and just put some moss around it. I have done nothing else to this. But let's come into some of my final thoughts on this one. So I'll start as I usually do and say, if I did not own this plant and I had a chance to get this plant, knowing what I know now, would I purchase it? 100% yes. Would I spend a lot more money to get a more mature specimen to begin with that probably was already mounted? Not because it was particularly difficult to mount. Also yes. Worth its money, basically, mainly because of how slow it can grow, but also how impressive it can get without needing an awful lot. And I will remind people, I should have said this in accessories and care, I have also grown this in regular household conditions and it was fine. It just needed watering a tiny bit more frequently because the soil media would dry, bone dry, more frequently, and then I would kind of flush it and then it would be fine for a good few days and then rinse and repeat, basically. So there is that. The other thing is, with this plant, in terms of a score, from 0, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, where would I, how would I score this? This, for me, is a strong 9. It's a very, very strong 9. It's an easy plant, as I mentioned, a feral plant. It's not particularly fussy in terms of its watering, and I'm giving a 9 to a fern. Remember that. Yes, you need to do something in terms of kind of mounting it up. And I've talked extensively about how I prefer to mount my plants these days in that video that I've linked earlier on. But yeah, a strong 9 or even a 10. Like, I love my Superbum. Very, very cool plant. And I am super glad that I've got it in my collection. I would be very sad if something was to happen to this. But as I said, if something did, I would replace it as quickly as I could possibly. So yeah, 5-year review of the Platycerium Superbum. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you have this plant? Is this a plant that you've been looking for? Is this something you've not heard of before and you're more used to the other Staghorn fern? I'm not going to say the name again. And would you be interested in trying something like this? This is one of the few plants that will 100% have my seal of approval every single time. Every single time. I do not know one person that has owned this plant personally, you will probably correct me down below, that has been massively unhappy with it or has found it hugely challenging. But as I said, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, this is not me kind of shaming anybody. If you have, do let us all know down below. And if there's a few of us that have grown this successfully, maybe we'll be able to kind of chip in and maybe offer some wise words of wisdom of things that you might want to try. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.